Honor and respects, this is Sancista Brujo Luis. Here I am in front of my altar. I'm praying to my ancestors, to my spirits. I got them some fresh flowers. I've been in Puerto Rico for 2 weeks. So, I had my altar resting until I was in Puerto Rico, and then I came back and I gave them fresh flowers. I brought them this Cruz de Palma from Puerto Rico. I got them some fresh flowers. And I had recorded a lot of video footage when I was in Puerto Rico of the templo, my grandmother's old templo, or what's left of it. Sadly to say, I lost most of my video footage. I do have some video footage of a baptism or points of baptism that I had given for a godchild. Not sure if I'm going to add this to the video. But so here I am in front of my altar, and I'm just giving them fresh water, giving them candles, some incense. And I was thinking about when I was in Puerto Rico, the stories, the ghost stories that are so popular in Puerto Rico. Evening times, usually around 7 to 8, everyone is watching their telenovelas. The telenovelas are their soap operas. And after their soap operas, before the news start, which the news in Puerto Rico starts around 10 o'clock. People go outside, they have a medianoche sandwich or a little sandwich, a little snack, and they sit in the veranda, where everyone sits, and they tell old stories of their old, the family. One thing I love about that time of night is the ghost stories. I don't care who your family is, what religion they are, there's always a time for a ghost story. This is the perfect time for people just to tell their personal ghost stories of what they went through. And so this is what this video is about, is just some ghost stories that I had heard when I was in Puerto Rico. Well, one, and then one that I was told by a person who experienced something. I didn't participate in this ghost story because I was in Puerto Rico only for 10 days. Yeah, 10 days. And I was there to do, spiritual things with my godchildren. So I really didn't. But my point is that this gentleman came one night and he started telling us this personal ghost story. And I want to relay that to you. So here I am in my altar, just giving my morning prayers. My voice is a little froggy because it is early morning. And I wake up with a froggy voice, and then it clears up during the day. But here I am in front of the altar, just praying and meditating. The first story that I want to share with you is titled El Jacho. There were so many ghost stories in Puerto Rico. I love their ghost stories. I love that time of night, 8 o'clock, 8 to 10, when we sit outside and we talk about our families and their histories, their stories, their lives. My favorite part of the night is the ghost stories. I love those ghost stories. So I want to share this one, which is called El Jacho. And this is a really popular Puerto Rican folktale that is really popular around this time, especially in Halloween. So I would like to share that with you. So the first story that I want to share today, which is a Puerto Rican ghost story, or folktale or folk legend, is called El Jacho, or El Jacho Centeno, and it is about an old Jibaro. Jibaro is a rural mountain man who works the land, and his name was Venancio. I think his name was Venancio. And Venancio was during the day, most of the day, he worked in the crops. And then after the crop work, he was also a fisherman. He survived, or he ate from the land. So during the day, or in the morning, he would work in his field. And then after the evening sun, or the evening sun, he would go fishing. Now, El Jacho is well known through the mountain areas of Puerto Rico, and everyone, it changes from what town he was from. Some people will say he was from, Orocovis. Some people will say he was from Salinas. Different people say, oh no, he was from this part he was part of my village or my town. Anyways, to make a long story short, Venancio was a Jibaro. He was a mountain folk. He would work the land during the day, his vegetables and fruit, and that's how he survived. And he would sell whatever he harvested, in the market. And at evening, after the sun would go down, he was also a fisherman. So he would go down into the river after the noonday sun, around 3 o'clock. He would go to the river and he would fish for fish, so he could, first he could survive and eat from the fish and from the vegetables and fruit that he grew, and he could also sell to make a little money. So anyways, one evening, Venancio went, after, the noonday sun, he went to the river to go fishing. It was a beautiful, clear day. So says the folk story, so says the legend. It was a clear day, and he went fishing that evening, and with him he had brought his torch. He always walked with a torch, and he brought a wooden cross that was part of his family from generation to generation to generation. Now, this is when there was no electricity in Puerto Rico. We're talking about the early 1900s, so this is an old legend. So, they didn't have electricity as the island has now. So he walked around with a torch that he would light up just in case he got home a little too late, would light his way home. And he would walk with his cross that was handed down, a wooden cross that he had that was handed down from family generations to generations. So anyways, one evening, Venancio went fishing. And that day was a strange day because usually the river that he fished, he could capture abundantly a lot of fishes. And that day, he could not capture anything. And he was so, what's that word? When you want to get something and you don't get it, that you just keep trying and trying and trying. He kept trying and trying, and he didn't realize the time, and had gotten a little bit dark. And sadly to say, Venancio didn't catch anything that day. So he realized, okay, it's getting dark. Let me get home. On his way home, it started to downpour, as it does in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, those downpours, those rains, they can come at any moment of the day. But it just got really dark all of a sudden. Venancio knew that rain was coming, so he said, let me go home before this rainfall catches me. Okay? So he's walking home, and all of a sudden, it just got really, really dark. And it started downpouring. So as I said, Venancio always, whenever he went fishing, he would bring his family cross that was with his family from generations to generations to generations, which was a wooden cross, and he would bring a torch and I guess matches or something. But it started raining, it started downpouring, and he couldn't find his way home. Now, mind you, in Puerto Rico is well lit. There are areas that are very dark, trust me, I've experienced it. But, so he couldn't find his way home. So he tried to light the torch that he had, and the torch was not lighting. And it was just raining on on Venancio. It's just raining and raining. And he couldn't find his way home. So all of a sudden, he had his cross on one of his pockets, his wooden cross. All of a sudden, in his left ear, he heard a voice say, Venancio, light the cross. He ignored this. He tried to ignore this so much, and he just kept walking in the dark, trying to make his way home. And he just kept hearing this voice in his ear saying, Venancio, light the cross. Venancio, enciende la cruz. Venancio, enciende la cruz. Venancio, enciende la cruz. This kept going and going, that Venancio just got really distraught because he couldn't find his way home and he couldn't light the torch. So without thinking, he lit one of the last matches that he had, and he was lucky to light the cross. And the cross went ablaze, and with the light of the cross, he was able to make it home. So anyways, a few days later, when he got home, the cross had burnt down almost completely he was holding it, so it burnt down a considerable amount. He got home, and sadly to say, he had gotten so wet that shortly afterwards he got pneumonia, and he got sick and died. There was no family there to take care of him. No one. He lived alone, so he did die. That is the end of Venancio, so we think. Now, there are people in this part of Puerto Rico that say that during the time when Venancio was walking home with the lit cross, you will see the spirit of a ghost, okay, with a lit torch of a cross. It seems like what it is, a lit torch of a cross, and he's looking on the ground. He's like looking around in the ground. And so what the story says is that Venancio, because the cross had been in the family from generation to generation to generation, Venancio could not make it into heaven, or cannot make it into heaven until he finds the ashes, all the ashes from the cross that he had burnt. So in Puerto Rico, especially the time, around this time, September, October is when it's happened, because it was around hurricane season, which is September, October. You will see the ghost of Venancio with a lit torch, or what it seems like a burnt cross, looking on the ground, and he seems like he's looking for the ashes of the cross that he had burnt. And so the people in the rural areas say that poor Venancio cannot make it into heaven until he finds every single ash from the burnt cross. And this is a really popular story that is told around this time, hurricane season, and going into Halloween. Now, El Jacho usually is a spirit that doesn't really bother nobody. He silently walks around looking for the ashes. But there are other ghosts in Puerto Rico that do make communication with people. And everyone talks about las Damas del Cementerio, or the ladies of the cemetery, the dames of the cemetery. Las Damas are believed to be women of the night, women who were prostitutes and who were murdered for their money. Okay, so they would sell their bodies for sexual pleasures, and some of these women were actually murdered, and they, whoever murdered these women, they stole their money. So anyways, there are certain tales that say that if you go past the cemetery from midnight to 3 o'clock in the morning, especially if you're walking, which who's ever walking by a cemetery at that time, you have to have some cojones with you, some, guts. But there are tales that say that whenever you pass a cemetery from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning, you will see una dama del cementerio, or una dama, a lady of the night, and she's asking for limosna. Limosna's alms. She's asking for coins. And when you go to give her limosna, when you go to give her money, the apparition disappears. It is said that these women of the night who were murdered or killed, and usually they were not given proper Christian burials, as so, the women of Puerto Rico say, because they were women of the night, they were not given proper Christian burials, that the spirits of these damas del cementerio, or these women of the cemetery, these women of the night, will walk looking for limosna, coins or payment, to pay the entrance to make it into the cemetery, and they are cursed forever and ever and ever to look for limosna or alms. And when you go to give them alms, their spirit disappears, because they are to go through this for eternity and eternity. So this is another folk tale in Puerto Rico. So if you're ever by a cemetery at 12 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning, and you just happen to be walking around, which you shouldn't be walking around in a cemetery or around a cemetery in Puerto Rico at that time, because it's not really safe. Often a lot of people will say they will come across a dama de la noche, or a dama del cementerio, and she will ask you for alms, usually 9 coins, and when you go to give her the 9 coins, the apparition disappears. And like I said, they are to, do this for eternity, because of the sins that they lived in life, and they cannot make it into the cemetery. They never received a proper Christian burial, so their souls often linger around the cemetery looking for payment, and when or for coins to make the payment into the burial so they can receive, I guess, a proper Christian burial. But they are doomed to suffer this for eternity. And this is another Puerto Rican folktale about las damas del cementerio, who ask for alms, 9 coins, to make the payment into the cemetery. Now, Puerto Rico, my island, is a predominantly Catholic island. Next to Catholicism is Pentecostalism. There's a lot of Catholics. The Spanish brought the Catholic religion into Puerto Rico. And then Pentecostalism is the second biggest religion in Puerto Rico. And then each village, there's also Santeria, there's Espiritismo, there's Brujeria, there's Curanderismo, and each village has its proper Espiritistas, Brujos. Most families who practice Brujeria is not a religion in Puerto Rico. It is just a practice. Witchcraft is just a practice. It's a family practice. Not like the United States, where Wicca exists. Brujeria is just a family practice. But Puerto Rico is a predominantly Catholic island. Like I said, second we have Pentecostalism. Then we have Espiritismo. Espiritismo is the third, around the third. And then we have people who practice Curanderismo and Brujeria and other religions, Hinduism. There's many religions in the island. The next story that I want to tell you was a personal story that I heard when I was there, and I'm going to call it El Beato Fernandez, because this was just a personal story from someone that told me, or that was telling us this when we were in Puerto Rico, just at night. And it was about a person who had bought land in Puerto Rico. Well, he had bought land. He was telling us he had bought land, and he built a house in this wooded area. He cleared the area, and he was building the house. So this was a personal story of this man who was just telling us this story, one night when we were just sitting outside, And so I'm going to call it El Beato. So before I can start the story, I want to go 20 years into the past of the origin of the story. There was a man, un beato, or a layman, who was studying to be a Catholic priest. And his name was, he was Fernandez, okay? I don't remember his first name. I'm gonna call him Victor, just for the story. Victor Fernandez, I can't remember his name. But Victor Fernandez was studying to be, he was a layman, un beato, and he was studying to be a Catholic priest. But with one secret that Beato had. The secret is that he just didn't like, well, of course he liked the wine in the church, but he had a dark secret. That dark secret was that he was a drinker. So every every weekend night, I think it was on Saturday nights, Fernandez would go out and drink. One night, Fernandez, this was 20 years ago, Don Fernandez or Fernandez went missing, was never found. He just disappeared from the face of the earth. He had gone after church, he had gone to a bar, and he went to go drink. And there he found, I think, 2 gentlemen. No one knows who these gentlemen were. These people were just passing by my town, and they had stopped in the bar. And Fernandez, they stroke a conversation. They had a conversation, and I guess Fernandez had left with them, and he was never seen again alive. He disappeared, and from what I hear, people said that he was a great preacher. He helped the community. But he had that dark secret. Well, not secret, because everyone knew that he loved to drink his rum. He loved to drink rum, and especially in the weekends, come Saturday night, he would drink so much that he would get drunk. And that fatal night, he disappeared and was never seen again. So that is 20 years ago. Now we're going to go into 20 years into the future. So now we're going to go into 20 years into the future, and we're sitting outside. It was just like last week. We're sitting outside, we're having coffee, when one of the neighbors came by, and he's hearing our ghost stories. And of course, every Puerto Rican person loves their ghost stories, and they like to share their ghost stories, and he started to share a personal experience. So this gentleman, he had bought land in this wooded area, and he decided to cut down some of the trees and to build a house there. Sorry that I'm shaking. I'm holding the camera. Anyways, he decided to build a house in this area. He had bought the land, and he wanted to build a house so that he could grow old and not pay rent and whatever. So he started building the house, and he decided to sleep in the house. Every night, this man, around midnight or so, this man would hear a man crying by the window, by his bed. He would hear the voice of a man crying, and he would turn on the light to check. There was nothing there. He'd turn off the lights, and again, he would hear this voice of a man crying, and not just crying, but the voice was crying, but also saying or praying the Our Father. See if I can hold this camera. But the voice was saying the Our Father and the Hail Mary, un Padre Nuestro y un Dios te salve María. This kept going on, and the man, it was so bad. Every time the man that built the house turned on the light, there was nothing there. He would check outside. He would get his machete. He would go outside. There was nothing. It got so bad to the point where he decided to get a big dog, just to protect the house, because he's sleeping and he's hearing these voices. This happened for some time. Every night he would hear the voice of a man crying, and the voice of a man praying the Our Father and the Hail Mary, as it was sobbing or in pain or in sorrow. So one day he decided to build a deck where people sit in Puerto Rico, and he hired some contractors, and they were digging up to put some poles on the ground to elevate where they would sit. And as they were digging, they found human bones. And I guess, they thought at first, oh my God, it could be Native American, but the bones were really fresh. They weren't, too old to be Native Americans. So they hired, I guess detectives came in, and they did forensic science, and they found out that the bones that they had found were of the Beato Fernandez, who must have been murdered that night. And the murderers buried him in that area. So this poor gentleman was hearing the sobbing and the prayers of El Beato Fernandez. And of course, this gentleman, not really believing in witchcraft or in spirits or in ghosts, he said, you know what, I'm going to do a novena, have people come and do a novena to guide this soul into the light. And so I guess, the detectives, they took out the bones and whatever, and this gentleman hired some Espiritistas or a Catholic, I don't know who it was, but the people came and they did a novena for 9 days, and after that, he never heard any more the praying ghosts or the sobbing ghosts anymore. So as you can see, in Puerto Rico, every night there were just So many ghost stories, and that's what I enjoy about 8 to 10 o'clock at night, the ghost stories of my island of Puerto Rico. One of the most documented forms of haunting that happens in Puerto Rico, and each village has their story, or each town or each city, are residual hauntings. Okay, now a lot of people confuse residual hauntings as like a poltergeist or an actual spirit. A residual haunting is a haunting that happens when a traumatic event happens in a location, and time seems to record this event and plays it either during the anniversary of when this event happened. So it plays it over and over. So a lot of hauntings in Puerto Rico are actually residual hauntings. One of the most well-known residual cases of residual hauntings from my barrio in Puerto Rico is of the bus full of children. Now today, I live in Puerto Rico. I live in the center of the island. And each village has its own school. But in the 1950s, this was not the case. Buses would go into the villages and pick up children and bring them to the pueblo, the main part of the town, so they can go to school. Most of the villages, you have to go up a mountain, and the roads, you can see like a ravine all the way down. Well, in one of the parts of the towns where I come from, in Comerío, in the 1950s, a bus full of children fell through a ravine, and all the children died. And this was in the 1950s. So in Puerto Rico, the schools start in the second week of August. Okay, and so around August, everyone goes to this part of where this happened, because it is said that you can still hear the screams of the voices of the poor children as they died. Now, are they ghosts? No. What's happening? That's a residual energy. Like I said, a residual energy is when time and space records an event and it plays it over and over during the anniversary of that event. And so I was invited to go to hear it, and I did go, and I really didn't hear nothing. It was a windy day that day, and you can hear the wind, and your imagination might hear a scream or so. I didn't personally hear anything, but a lot of people do say that they hear the last voices of the screaming children as the bus fell down the mountain, and all the children died. And that is a really a lot of residual hauntings do occur in Puerto Rico. So now I just want to end the video just with one last story. Now in Puerto Rico, just like in every Caribbean island and South America and Central America, there are many forms of spirits, both human and non-human spirits. And in Puerto Rico, some of the most popular spirits we have La Llorona. La Llorona is the weeping spirits. Often La Llorona are spirits of women who in life lost either a child or a love. And often these spirits, you hear them mourning. So La Llorona would be more similar to, or would be called in English, the mourning woman. In Puerto Rico, we also have La Gritona. La Gritona is the screeching spirit. And often, again, it's a woman. Mostly it's a female entity, or in life was a female, and they screech. They have this blood-curdling screech at night. And if you go to help them, they supposedly take your soul. In one of my videos, I spoke about, I think, El Cuco. El Cuco is well known throughout all Latin America, Mexico, and all parts of, Spanish-speaking countries. And it's a spirit that comes at night to take the souls of naughty children. Most parents talk to the children. about El Cuco. But there are also a non-human or non-corporal spirits or elemental spirits. And one experience happened to my mother when she was a kid, and I was listening to a story when I was in Puerto Rico, and they were talking about their ghost stories and just paranormal activities that had happened. Now, my mother was one of the youngest out of 9 children. She was the second youngest of 9 children, and my grandmother had, older sons and older daughters, and then my mother, the older sons, when they would, at night, when they got their paycheck during the weekends, they would often go to the bars, to go drink, and my uncles were often fighters. They enjoyed, anyone who drinks, they get that liquid courage. So mind you, in these days, my grandmother lived on top of the mountain, and then my family, as they grew up and they built their own homes, they moved down into the valley. So the bar at the time, this was in the early 50s or so. My mother was a young girl, early mid 50s. The home where my grandmother lived was in the mountain, and they'd have to go down this mountain all the way to the village to a bar, and there they would go drinking. Now now it is paved, but in those days it was not paved. This dirt road, you had to go down into the bar to go drink. So as usual, there was no cell phones in those days, and someone had told my grandmother that my uncles were drinking, and they were just fighting and arguing and whatever it was the case. And so she decided to get my mother and my youngest uncle dressed and go down this dirt road in the dark. Now, mind you, these dark roads don't have light, and until this day they really don't have light. So they got them dressed, and I took the walk, and I calculated it's 30-minute walk down this literally, that's how far it is. By car it's like 5 minutes. So they got them dressed. It was late at night, and with a lantern they decided to go down the hill so that my grandmother could get these her sons home to their wives. So as they were walking down this hill, now this is not a human spirit. This is more of an Hada de Fuego. Hada de Fuego are what is known in European as sprites. Sprites are elemental spirits, and we have sprites of air and sprites of fire and sprites of water. Now, what's interesting about the word sprite, okay, or Hadas, which are similar to fairies, the word sprite comes from the Latin word spiritu, or the French word espirit or spirit, which is the foundation of the English word for spirit. So these Hadas de Fuego, or these sprites, anyways, so they're walking down the middle of the road, and all of a sudden it was dark, and they just had one lantern to illuminate their pathway. All of a sudden, the way my mother describes it, as they were walking down this road, when on the 4th of July, those those sticks that you light up and they have fire that just kind of like goes all over the place. I can't think of what they're called. She had never seen one of those in the 1950s, but she describes it as looking as that. One of those things, it was like a fire, and it just had sparks, a sparkler. It was like a sparkling fire came flying. It literally just came flying in the darkness and hit her on the dress. And she was stunned. My uncle, my youngest uncle, was stunned. He must have been 9. My mother must have been 12 or so, and my grandmother. So my mother automatically started she thought it was fire, so she started to like swap down her dress to make sure she didn't catch on fire. And my grandmother ran to her, and they didn't, from what my mother says, is that they didn't feel the fire. So she's swapping down the dress, and that little sparkly thing, which to me would be una Hada de Fuego or a sprite, fell on the ground. And literally from the ground, it jumped and flew onto my uncle, and it did the same thing. And my grandmother ran to my uncle to turn this, this little sparkly fire off. They both didn't get burned. They both didn't feel the fire. And my grandmother hit my uncle to get this little fiery thing off of it. And then it just flew away. As quick as it came, it quickly left and it flew away. And I told my mom, I said, Mommy, that sounds like una hada de fuego or a sprite. And my mother's like, well, she doesn't really understand much about those, European spirits. So, she had no explanation for what it was. And I don't know if it was a sprite, just from the way she was describing it, it sounded like one. So I just left it to that. But there are non-elemental spirits, both of, you gotta understand that Puerto Rico, like most of the Caribbean, has spirits that come from Europe. With the bringing of with the Spanish, there are Native American spirits, and there are also African spirits. So all these forms of spiritual energies are in Puerto Rico, original and native spirits. And all these spirits brought from Europe and from Spain, and then the Japanese and Chinese, they came to work in the island in the 40s, and the Irish, Puerto Rico had a big, huge Irish immigration in the 1940s or 50s. So all these forms of spirits came to the Caribbean, and they still exist in the popular folklore and mythology of the culture. So anyways, I just want to end that video with that. And I hope you enjoyed it, because I've been recording this video all day. And if you do, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. And please leave a comment down below. And I'm sorry if I've been shaking. I've been doing the video as I've been, in between clients. So if you do like this video, hit that like button. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe. And share the video on your favorite social media. This is Sancista Brujo Luis, Santo Sanse.